All right, everybody. So today we have back on the podcast Jacob Schepis. How you doing, man?
Very well, thank you, Dave. Good to be here.
Yep. So I think at this point you've been on, man, I don't even know, 4 or 5 times, usually with Steve Hall or something like that. But we got you individually today. So we were talking about all the craziness that we've both been going through, the whole world's been going through. I think some gyms are reopened, yours is not yet, but you're probably still doing, you're able to work out, right?
Yes, so I'm able to work out in the gym, which is nice, but it's one of those things that I try to sort of keep to a minimum just because I am doing my best to stay home as much as possible and all those sorts of things. But yes, I get to go to the gym, which is great. I feel for other Melbournians who are unable to go to the gym. That sucks,
Yeah.
and anyone else in the world. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the gym at this stage.
Yeah, it is crazy because I was thinking like I'm not really, I don't think I'm like an anxious person or anything like that. But there was a point a couple weeks in where it's like, man, I'm not working, gyms are closed, and I definitely felt this kind of like build up. And thank God I do have stuff at home. Like I have a decent amount of weights here, and then my parents' house I've got pretty much a full setup. So it's been a blessing. I've been able to pretty much do my regular routines, but I can't imagine, at this point, almost 4 months without being able to lift. I mean, psychologically, physically, it's got to be tough.
Yeah, yeah. I think the psychological challenge is what most people are really finding difficult because we rely on exercise and training for all of the mood enhancing benefits just as much as the physical stuff as well. And I think they're very much tied together. And when you remove training from someone's routine, they no longer get that exercise and activity, those social interactions. And then, you couple that with some, loss of strength, muscle, they start feeling a little bit different,
Yeah.
eating a little bit poorly, and all of those things combined. And people are just in a bit of a funk.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also, like you said, part of it is like the exercise itself, but part of it is a lot of us, we don't just exercise to exercise, we exercise towards specific goals. A lot of us
Correct.
are very driven, and so I look at myself. I've actually been cutting this entire time, and I've probably since February down about 20 some pounds. But being able to still pursue a goal like that has been nice. And I will say, being home all day doing nothing while dieting is not a great strategy because there's a lot of time to focus on food, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One I think good cutting tip is to stay as busy as possible. But I think something that Abel Chabai and I were talking about is how you feel while cutting versus bulking, and this is something we kind of want to get your input on because you've shown pictures where you're very lean. You've competed, gotten very lean. So when you get very, like, let's say below 10%, maybe even below like 8% body fat, we are wondering about like your mood because I know for me at one point I was tracking, it's like general happiness. At the end of the day, I'd evaluate how did I feel throughout the day. And I noticed a pretty noticeable trend where most days when I was maintaining or bulking up, I was probably about an 8 out of 10. And then it started to go down about a 7 out of 10. And towards the end of my cut, I definitely wasn't depressed or anything like that. But
Mhm.
most days I was probably coming in at about 6 out of 10. A lot of food focus, obviously, but just kind of like a general lack of enjoyment of things. And obviously, there's always the genetic factors of how well can you lose body fat and all that. But I kind of wanted to hear your take on that and looking at somebody's mood, or even for a client of yours, if they start to kind of be low a lot of days.
Yeah, no, I definitely experience firsthand the mood disturbances that we've seen reported both anecdotally and a lot of the research on bodybuilders. There's quite a few studies that have shown that when bodybuilders get quite lean, they start to experience serious mood disturbances from baseline, anyhow. Um, but yeah, like you and many other people, when food gets taken away from you and you become hungry and irritable, sleep is no longer something that is of the same duration or quality. I start to get pretty down. Like my overall mood is definitely impacted. I'd just be more snappy, I guess. I'm
Mm-hmm.
less tolerable of things and people, and I guess that has downstream effects on um, just your overall like mental state. It's fun. It's kind of funny because I think when you start getting lean, like your self-esteem starts to rise a little bit. Like you become a lot more confident and all of those sorts of things. And as soon as you start to feel the mood disturbances as well, it's like all of a sudden that hyper focus on your body isn't as enhancing of your like self-esteem anymore, because you're so focused on all the weak areas of your body that you want to lose fat in, and you start
Right.
like stressing, you start obsessing about food, and it's just a real like tormenting sort of emotional period, if you let it be, of course. Like it's not something that is, I would say, across the board, um, a problem every minute of every day.
Right.
It definitely comes in waves, I think, and I'm sure you would be the same.
Yeah, I think for me, and I'll find I might have a day where, especially because like sometimes I'll incorporate various forms of fasting, not because I think it's anything magic, although with my gut issues, I do find it benefits me there. But I'm talking either intermittent fasting or the occasional like 24-hour fast. But what I'll find is sometimes if I'm getting towards the end of a period like that, I will kind of be towards my limit where, okay, like the food focus is just too high and life is just genuinely less enjoyable to an extent. And if I get back to just like moderately low calories for a few days, I start to feel okay. One of the things that I've done during this diet more than any other diet is diet breaks. So rather than just like a really big refeed or something like that, I've incorporated 3 to 7 day periods where I just eat at maintenance. And within really like 2 to 3 days, my libido is higher, my energy is higher. I just feel like, okay, you know what? That was a good break. I can get back to it. So I've definitely been a fan of diet breaks. And I think the research is showing more and more that some of these diet breaks have more beneficial effects than, let's say, like, okay, a giant cheat meal or something like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely a proponent of diet breaks. I think Jackson Pios's work that will be published, I would dare say, later this year. He's conducted one of the biggest studies, at least in the Southern Hemisphere, on diet breaks in athletes. And he's looked at a number of different measures, such as resting metabolic rate, lean mass, their mood, and all these other psychological variables. So we're really interesting to see what he comes up with, because that's the only diet break study, to my knowledge, that has been done on athletes. Every other study has been done on obese or overweight individuals, to my knowledge, anyhow.
Oh, is that
Um,
currently being run?
yes,
Oh,
yeah,
awesome.
currently now. So I should definitely get him on the podcast to have a chat
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that. But yes, anecdotally, I have seen both refeeds and diet breaks have this psychological benefit of improving like how somebody just overall feels towards their diet, their mood and everything, without them even eating the food.
Hmm.
Like it's crazy. When I give a client or an athlete, when I say, cool, we're going to call it diet break here, if it's not planned or whatever, all of a sudden their tone of voice changes.
Yeah.
They have a pep in their step. And it's like, they haven't eaten a morsel of food yet. But
Right.
it's like releasing the restraint,
Yeah.
by just allowing people to have a greater calorie intake, automatically makes them feel as though they have this greater flexibility. And I think that in part um, gives this sense of like liberation almost.
Yeah.
And people just feel a lot more relaxed and happier because they get to eat a little bit more. Um, so anecdotally, I've seen that on numerous occasions, which is like crazy. But for sure, as soon as you have, I'd say 2 or more days eating at maintenance, having greater intake of carbohydrate and just being able to include more food in your diet and potentially more variety in your food choices. Yeah, man, you feel a lot better. It's therapeutic what carbohydrates do when you're deep into a cut.
Yeah. I think even for me, so I just been experimenting a little bit with keto right now. And again, I always have to put the little clarifier there for anybody listening. Definitely don't think keto is magic. Still got to have a calorie deficit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I'm more just playing around with it. One, just out of interest. I have many times in the past. And then two, I do find that for me at least, it seems to make it easier to create a deficit in the sense that I just seem a little bit less hungry. However, I will say, like you were talking about the benefits of carbs, I do think most of the evidence shows when we look at the refeeds and everything, we see the most benefit from carbs. But I've even found, just kind of like you said, it could be psychological and somewhat physical, just the break with no carbs. So I'm not even doing a cyclical keto diet. I'm just doing like literally like almost no carbs. Just having a few days instead of like at 1800, I'm at 2800. and it's still
Yeah.
it's just more meat, avocados, vegetables.
Yeah.
It's honestly very relieving. So I do think
Interesting.
carbs tend to have a pretty beneficial effect there. But even without the carbs, I notice a noticeable improvement there just from a couple days.
That's interesting. I have never really experimented with like protein and fat refeeds or
Hmm.
deliberate refeeds. Anyway, I'm sure I've run something similar when I've had like a cheat day and gone and just got like
Right, right,
steak and all the rest of it. But in saying that, when I do give refeeds, depending on the context of the individual, if it's not somebody who's in a contest prep really close to stage, usually I will just bump calories up,
hmm,
and I'm not
right,
too fussed where those calories come from.
right,
Like maintenance calories is maintenance calories. And I usually bring their protein down and say, cool, we've been hitting 2.2 grams per kg. You can hit 1.8 grams for the next few days, and fats can come up a little bit, like depending on the situation, obviously, because I think some people, you give them refeeds and that can potentially trigger binge eating.
yeah,
It can lead to a lot of overeating and make it very difficult for them to get back on track. Whereas some people really just have no issue. They can moderate their diet according to whatever the numbers you set are, and then get back on track, no worries. But in the cases where I have somebody like the latter situation, I'm very much inclined to just decrease the restraints a lot by giving them more flexibility. Say, hey, you can even have a meal out. If you want to go get breakfast with your friends and family, get some eggs on toast. You don't need to track that, eyeball
right,
it. And just those little things, like not having to prepare a meal yourself. Being able to eat out with friends and family, like, and feel like you're part of that social atmosphere when you're dining with loved ones, that can go a really long way in like decreasing that psychological stress
yeah,
of a diet as well. Because the stresses of diet are not just the reduction in food, it's also the restraint, and it can be actual restraint, which is how granular does this individual need to be when they're measuring and tracking their food and reporting and all those kind of things. But it's also perceptual too. So how much of a prisoner does this person feel like they are on the diet?
right.
And in cases where somebody feels like a prisoner, sometimes letting them out just a little bit to roam around and get some sunshine and exercise can go a long way to just making it easier for them to get back in the jail cell for a little bit longer and serve their
Right,
sentence.
right, right. Something I was thinking about this morning, I want to get your take on is there's this kind of common notion, I feel like, in the fitness industry, especially even within the evidence-based industry, of building your metabolism. And, that was the idea
Yeah.
with the super slow reverse dieting in the past and all that. And this idea that, the higher you get your calories, the higher they're going to be when you diet down. And that's not really my experience, other than like maybe for the first couple of weeks of dieting. And related to that, I find that while the diet breaks help, and getting leaner and then taking a break is useful, for me the difficulty largely has to do with how lean I am. So just as an example, when I was at my heaviest, I was like 220 pounds, and my goal was, let me get down to like 190ish, and then I'm going to take a whole like 3 month break. Like that whole summer I just took that break. So I did that, and honestly it was very easy to get down from 220 to 190. I mean, yeah, I had days I was hungry, not every day was super easy, but relatively easy. I then maintained 190 on 3,500 calories the whole summer. And I was eating what I wanted. It was all good. Stayed at 190. To get down from 190 to 180 then, and at that point, close to the leanest I'd ever been, man, that probably took me another 4 months of like, and like, it was actually pretty difficult for me to do that. And I'm finding the same thing here. I started at 205. 195 was like a joke. Like I literally did that in 6 weeks. I wasn't hungry, easy. Going from 195 to like 184 right now, huge increase in food focus despite the diet breaks, big increase in fatigue. Calories have had to come way lower. So, most people would argue, wow, 3 months at 3,500 calories, you could now lose fat so easily. But that just wasn't my experience. And I seem to have a pretty narrow buffer where my body wants to
Yeah.
be, and going above that or below it is pretty difficult at times.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people are in a similar boat. Uh, the effort it takes, both in the diet, in magnitude and duration, to get down below your settling point, whatever that may be, requires just a significant amount of effort in comparison to getting to the low end of your settling point. I find most people usually, can get to the low end of what is comfortable for them, or pushing the boundaries of what they could sustain long term. Relatively easily, especially if they're like an experienced lifter and dieter, and they know the process and they know how to get there, and they don't have any psychological barriers and things like that. But beyond that, that's where it takes a lot of elbow grease, and calories generally have to start coming down real low to get beyond that point, much further below whatever you would have to maintain, whatever you could consume to maintain that low end of your settling point. I've seen that with a lot of my clients and athletes, myself as well. I know for me, I can get down to the high 70s, which is probably sitting around 9% body fat, like looking some of those photos you mentioned where I was looking pretty lean or whatever. I can get down to that on like 2,200, 2,300 calories. But to get down to under 75, which is only like 3 or 4 more kilos, and getting to the 7-8% body fat, that's usually requires me to get down to 1,800-1,900 calories. It's like much lower. It's like it doesn't seem like a lot, but 300 calories is essentially another meal at that point.
Is that your average, or is like average with refeeds, or those are your low days?
That'd be low days, and refeeds and stuff become much less frequent in those digging phases as well. Depending on timelines and stuff, I generally prefer to just go hard for as long as I can and then pull back when I need to, versus like the start-stop approach. That's just me personally. But I do like 2-day refeeds for the most part. I think it works well for most people, especially from a lifestyle point of view. You diet during the week, when you have your structure and routine on the weekends, you got a little bit more flexibility. You can go socialize, you can fit in a bit more food, and that's nice. But when I'm dieting, usually towards the back end of a dieting phase, it might be 1 refeed, on the weekends, and sometimes it'll even be every 10 to 14 days, just because I'd rather keep the foot on the gas and not have to worry about like decelerating. Essentially, it's like, okay, just get in the zone, do the work, and then you can get out a little bit sooner.
How's your activity during that time in terms of like cardio, step count, if you track that, workouts per week?
I'm a sloth. I'm an absolute sloth. That's the reason my calories usually need to get so low, because I see a huge reduction in my non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so my NEAT. Whereas I can use a perfect example. I did a contest prep with my brother back in 2013, and I coached myself, and I coached him also. And I was on stage 70 kilo on stage, and he was 60 kilos. Same height. I probably had a little bit more muscle mass as well. And he was eating a good 300-400 calories more than me the entire contest prep.
Wow.
And I was like furious. And he's just one of those people who's got a really thrifty metabolism. Like, he was on like 2,400. He was feeling all the same things I was feeling. But I was on like 2,000 calories when he was on like 2,400. Then I got down to 1,600 at my lowest point, and he was on like 2,000. And I'm just like, what the hell? You're 10 kilos lighter than me. And that's simply because, this was before I knew about daily step count and tracking NEAT and all those kind of things. So I was just doing my 2 cardio sessions a day. He was doing the same. But he's somebody who, in response to like overfeeding, he starts ramping up his energy expenditure. He'll get really hot, sweaty. He'll start moving around, fidgeting more. Whereas when I overeat, I'll be sleeping down. I'll be lying down, sleeping. I'm just like a sloth, as I said. And same when we're dieting, like he just doesn't seem to become as sedentary as I do when we diet. So in terms of like my own activity levels during a cutting phase, they usually have to be monitored very closely. Otherwise, I just see a huge reduction. And then we see plateaus, stalls, calories have to come down further. And I think it's always a good idea to keep energy flux as high as possible. So trying to push energy expenditure up as high as you can to allow you to diet on higher calories. I think that's a very beneficial thing, especially if you're in an extended fat loss phase or a contest prep where you're going to be getting quite lean. You don't want to be on poverty macros for long at all. And
Right.
yeah, keeping activity high is always a wise idea.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you can talk about the difference even just between your brother, who obviously a lot of genetic similarities there. But like when I talked to Steve Hall and Abel, and I saw that they got very lean on like 22 to 2,400 calories. And I'm looking at me, and then I'm like, I actually have it pulled up here of like an Excel sheet. So I have like my calories, but I also have like my weekly average. So even with refeeds, I'm only at like 2,100 calories or so. So that means my low days are legit like 1,600 calories, and then I have like a refeed, here and there. And it's not horrible, but it definitely sucks. I mean, it's not like I'm like very lean. Right now I'm sitting about 184, 185, and I don't know. I would call myself beach lean, 11%,
Yeah,
something like that.
you're looking good,
And
man.
thank you. So for me to do that, I will also consider though that I'm pretty minimalistic in my training. So I look at my step count and it's maybe like 6,000 a day. Whereas I know like Abel and Steve are getting 15 to 20,000 a day. They're always on the move. Steve's doing like 2-a-day workouts. Abel is doing daily workouts. I work out like 3 or 4 days a week. So
Yeah,
while there's some variation in metabolism, as you mentioned, a huge part of it is your responses with meat. And also just, I'm not that active. I could be more active and lose weight. I mean, I lost fat when I was like 160 back in high school, faster on higher calories because I was like on the swim team and I was working out and I was doing morning cardio. I mean, that's all going to play a role. So I think some people talk about just their metabolism, but that is a factor. But I do think a lot of people ignore like how much, like you said, how much of a sloth are you becoming during your
yeah.
diet? It's definitely a factor.
Totally, man. I think if you don't pay attention to your response when dieting in terms of your activity levels, if you're not monitoring that stuff, you'll run into plateaus if you're somebody who is a little bit more inclined to be a sloth a lot quicker than you realize. And it can be very, very frustrating and or a lot harder than it needs to be. Like I'm the kind of person who, if I'm dieting, I'll just sit down at every opportunity I get. I have to make a conscious effort to, stand up and,
Yeah.
even getting like 10,000 steps a day when I'm dieting is like super, super challenging. Like I actually have to, schedule in a walk or do things like that. Whereas when I'm not dieting, getting like 10, 12,000 steps, it's not a worry at all because I've just got a lot more energy, obviously.
Yeah.
And so you couple that with a reduction in like body mass, and you just start, burning less and less calories, and you're going to have to eat less and less calories. And unless you're aware of that and willing to, trade off expenditure for lower calories, and you're happy to, go on a quite low calorie diet, then it's probably really, really good idea to keep your activity levels up as much as you can for as long as you can.
Yeah, and it really, this kind of like this last cut especially has made me appreciate how difficult it can be for some people. I'm not like a naturally lean guy at all. I grew up kind of fat, but I don't think I have like the worst metabolism or the worst response with meat. But I look at, and man, for me to get up above 205 this time, I mean, it took effort. Like I was actually looking forward to dieting because my body, and again, I do have gut issues, but I just didn't want to eat that much anymore. And like I said, that 195 to 200 range, I really feel like I can eat whatever. Now, obviously eating whatever doesn't mean 5,000 calories a day. But what I mean is I don't have to be conscious of it. Like I want to on a cruise, and usually I go on a cruise where I'm dieted down, which is probably not the best idea. And I'll easily gain 5 to 10 pounds on a cruise. Whereas this time, I mean, I still felt like I was eating whatever I wanted, and I was the exact same weight the whole cruise. And then getting down leaner and leaner, I think, man, like I know that it would be easier to maintain this weight, obviously, than to keep dieting, right? For me to maintain 185 wouldn't be that hard, but for me to go from 185 to 180 is very difficult. But either way, if it was as difficult as this cut is all the time, I don't know if I would even have the willpower to do that for life. You know what I mean? And there are people out there whose body fat settling point is just significantly higher. And, I don't want to give excuse to people who maybe are lazy and just don't put any effort in, but there really are people who it's like, how difficult this is for me to maintain this, or how difficult it is for you to get to like that, 75 kilograms. For some people out there, that's how it is just to get to almost like what we would consider normal. And I think that's important, especially if you're training people, that it's very easy to just say, oh, like, just work harder, you just got to have that motivation. But there's a huge difference between, okay, I put in the hours at the gym and versus I'm thinking about this all day, every day. I'm tired all day, every day. And that wears on anybody.
Totally, man. I've got a few things to say to that. I definitely agree that there's a huge genetic component to how easy it is for somebody to diet, as well as massive behavioral, lifestyle, and psychological factors that influence how easy it is for somebody to, restrain from eating and control their food intake and stick to a diet. Um, and I will say to the point that you brought up at the end there, where like for some people thinking about it all day is just like so draining. Um, Man, one of the most powerful things I've come to realize over the years is that the less I think about my physique and my diet and being a good bodybuilder, the better my physique looks, the easier it is to diet, and the better
Yeah.
bodybuilder I become.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. And I attribute a lot of that. And I've had a lot of conversations with a good friend of mine, Dr. Jake Lenardon. He's got his PhD in eating disorders, specifically binge eating, and he's a quite prolific researcher in that field from Melbourne. I've had conversations with him where I've said I think a lot of the psychological issues that are related to body and food in part come down to maturity and just going through the aging process where you accumulate responsibilities and all of a sudden your physique and everything that you do, to try and change that over time just becomes less and less important to you, which makes it a lot easier to do essentially because you're not over obsessing about it. You're becoming paralyzed by analysis. You're not constantly thinking about how you look and, getting down if you've seen the scale weight climb. Like you've got real problems to deal with. You've got kids, you've got business, you've got relationships, you've got all of these things. And there's actually research on this that shows that if you put too much stock into your body image, your weight and shape, it's called overevaluation of weight and shape. So as you start to put more value into other domains of your life, whether it's sports, hobbies, relationships, work, career, your education, whatever the case may be, and you put less weight into how you look and what the scale says, all of a sudden your self-esteem will improve and you'll start to find, sticking to the diet and trying to, get bigger muscles and all those sorts of things, lose fat, just become that little bit easier cognitively anyway.
Right.
Not necessarily to do the thing because now
Sure.
you've got less time, less energy and resources to do that thing. But in terms of, because we're talking specifically about like that cognitive tension that people experience when they're trying to improve their body composition, it's like they're thinking about it all day. They're thinking about the next meal after they've just eaten their meal. They're trying to, stop themselves from eating when they go out for a meal. They're like looking at other people's food. I know all this because I've done it. Sure. And they're thinking, I wish I could have that. Why don't they care about their body and like dieting like I do? I just want to be a normal person. Like I've had all those kind of thoughts, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate. But yeah, I definitely think as the years have gone on, the less I've worried about how I look, it's like it's been easier and easier to sort of maintain not six-pack. I'm not six-pack lean, but like, I got visible abs and I'm in pretty good shape. And if I was to go, into any gym, like people say, oh yeah, he lifts, he's got a good physique. And if I went to the beach, people say, oh well, he's in really good shape, he must have dieted. It's like, no, this is just living now. It's like taking a long time, like better part of 10 years to get to this point. A lot of effort. I've gone through the ringer to get to a situation where I am able to maintain a leanish physique with very little effort. But I dare say a lot of that's attributed to going through the process of putting everything into it, learning as much as I could about it, and then over time starting to de-emphasize where my physique and my training situate on my priority list, only so far as they don't completely fall off the priorities, but so much so that I'm now thinking about it less, obsessing about it less, and I can actually do it and enjoy it and not have that cognitive tension, which all of a sudden, because that's the bottleneck for some people to maintain their physique, right? It's like the cognitive tension they experience.
Right.
So if you can start to de-emphasize your physique, and that, you know, changes just that level of stress that you're feeling, like mentally and emotionally day to day, that could, you know, be the catalyst for you to just be able to maintain a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of sparks something to me, because the other day somebody had mentioned how, you know, they know that I do somewhat minimalistic training now, and they were saying, well, you know, and again, I think a lot of people who follow you, follow me, follow Abel, follow Steve Hall, and so they were saying, well, you know, you're saying like you're maxed out, but don't you think, like, look how much more work like Steve does is doing these 2-a-day trainings, everything. Don't you think if you did that, you could gain another 10, 20%? And I said, I genuinely don't, because it's not like I've always been like this. I was incredibly obsessed for literally about 12 years. I've done everything that you could imagine in my power. And
I think we've had very similar experiences, you and I.
Yeah. And at some point, it still is going to stop working. You know, you're not going to just keep progressing forever. And then what I found was, okay, so I was killing myself. I don't have any regrets about that, because I needed to know that I put everything into it. But once I did that and I stopped growing, maintaining was so much easier. And so it's not like a defeatist attitude. It's more just, I try to be pragmatic about it and say, okay, if I do 12 workouts a week or 3 workouts a week, I'm pretty much going to look about the same, you know, and thankfully we can maintain so much easier. I mean, imagine if you had to be at like peak effort to maintain your physique. I mean, that would it would hinder your life. So I found that, wow, you know, this whole cut, I've maintained my strength and size very well. I don't need 12 workouts a week. And so it's not that just because and like same with you, I know I think your frequency is similar-ish to mine. It's not like if you just it's pretty much identical. And then if you ramped it up to 10, it's not like your physique's going to just explode and be so much better. And maybe even like you said, with the psychological aspect, you might just be more stressed. So I just kind of want to clarify for people, like, minimalistic training doesn't mean you've just consigned yourself to no results or anything. It's just, and sometimes it's just more pragmatic for life.
Minimalistic training should be like a tool. It should be a strategy that you incorporate when the time calls for it, and when your goals no longer require you to push things, you know, to a level where you're trying to maximize adaptations. And that's most people who aren't full-time bodybuilders or have their livelihood and careers predicated upon their physiques and how they look, right? For me, I spent years doing 2-a-days, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's when I was bodybuilding, when I'm powerlifting. You know, I train 4 or 5 days a week, 3 hours at a time. Like, no shit, the session is 3 hours to do like 4 exercises. But as soon as I'm not doing that, in order to maintain like my muscularity, make small gains, and this is where specializing comes in handy, because you can still make gains with lower frequency, sort of what would appear on paper to be minimalistic training, because you're doing you know 4 sessions a week. But if it's 4 sessions like I'm currently doing, where you're training pretty much chest and arms in all 4 sessions, or 3 out of 4 sessions for chest, and then arms pretty much in 4 sessions, well, that's not really minimalistic. It seems minimalistic in comparison to someone like Steve, who's doing 10 sessions a week. But at the same time, it's very strategic. And even in that case, if you adopt that minimalistic approach where you're training 3 or 4 sessions and you have a very balanced program, and your volume and whatnot is sort of split up across all your body parts quite evenly, just to maintain or make some small gains. You know, if you are going through periods of life where, you know, work's really, really busy, you have a lot of deadlines, projects, you have uni exams, you're going on holidays, whatever the case may be, that's a perfect opportunity to start learning how to down-regulate training, de-emphasize it on your priority list a little bit, be okay with not always pushing for the best gains possible, and just hang tight. And it's daunting doing that the first time. And I'm sure you were probably the same. It was definitely daunting for me. And I know a lot of people are very afraid to bring volume down to, you know, maintenance levels or reduce their frequency. They feel like they're not doing enough. But I think COVID-19 is a perfect example of how little you can do to still maintain your gains, and how quickly, when you return to the gym, you regain your strength and size. And it's like, oh, wow, like I had 6-8 weeks of doing banded bodyweight workouts, you know, hardly, you know, the optimal stimulus that we would otherwise be able to get with a fully decked out gym and facility. But upon returning to the gym, people have now realized that in a couple of weeks they're back to baseline and there's no real issues.
Totally. So kind of relating to the volume thing, and I don't know how openly you can talk about this. I think it's kind of out there, but I know there was a little back and forth with Mike Israetel and Eric Helms, and there was like a letter to the editor written on a recent paper by Mike. And I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts on that. From what I've seen, I have not gone through all of the comments and everything. Basically, everybody's pretty familiar with Mike Israetel's method at this point. Start at a low number of sets. You're building up from MEV to MRV and rinse and repeat. A lot of other people don't find that to be terribly, not that it's ineffective, but that it's not necessary to be changing volume so dramatically. I would say I kind of fall more into the latter camp. I think the 3DMJ crew tends to. So I guess, what are your thoughts on it? And what was that letter to the editor about?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of being on the letter to the editor with Brian Miner. He was the lead author, and Eric Helms. So the three of us wrote a response letter to the editor to Mike's original letter to the editor, where we sort of discuss some of the points raised, specifically set volume progression within a mesocycle. I think Mike has a lot of really good arguments, and I think he's changed his tune a little bit. In terms of the way that he does go about increasing sets within a mesocycle. Initially, it was very proactive, predetermined, add 2 sets sort of each week, move from MEV to MRV, whereas now, based on the most recent article he published on Renaissance periodization, in defense of adding sets within a mesocycle, he is now promoting auto-regulating volume. So when objective and subjective recovery is upheld, you can increase volume by a couple of sets. So around 20% is what James Krieger recommends. I tend to agree with that. If subjectively and objectively recovered and you're plateauing. So we wrote this response letter to the editor, and we're basically saying that the best way to approach overload is reactive overload, where you are increasing load and reps based on adaptations that have taken place in prior workouts. So bigger muscle is a stronger muscle relative to its size. So whatever set volume you're using and RPEs, if that is an appropriate stimulus, you will get an adaptation from that. You will grow. Therefore, in the next session, you will need to overload to maintain that intensity threshold for the given sets. And a lot of the research is looking at set volumes, comparing groups for an entire mesocycle. So there's a bit of inference that because higher set volumes in Group A got better gains than lower set volumes in Group B, that adding sets is how we should progress, because it's the most closely related variable to inducing, or most specific variable to a hypertrophy stimulus. But we don't necessarily have data on that at this point. And there are a number of drawbacks to adding volume, most of them being pragmatic, but also potential increase of injury risk if you move from, say, 10 to 20 sets in a mesocycle and you're increasing load and RP. That's pretty significant increase in volume load. And then Eric's spoken a little bit recently about how volume is not just the number of sets, but volume load, and that's what should be progressing over the course of somebody's lifting career. Not only do we need to pay attention to sets, but volume load, which is reps times sets times load. So if sets are held constant and adaptations are taking place, like I mentioned earlier, where you're getting bigger and you can lift more weight, for the same reps and same RPE, or you can lift more reps with the same weight at the same RPE, the volume load goes up.
Right, sure.
So volume load should be increasing over our training career as we get bigger and stronger. Whether or not we need to increase sets to achieve an overloading stimulus, I'm not sure. But I tend to fall in the middle of both camps a little bit. I like to progress sets early in the mesocycle, moving up from like an intro week, first week, increasing volume a little bit, maybe the second overloading week. But then I'll generally hold volume constant and, like I said, auto-regulate any changes in set volume based on how the person's recovering, their performance. But I will say that just from an enjoyment, buy-in, and to, sprinkle a little bit more sort of overload and stimulus into the program with my clients at the end of their mesocycle, I'm not averse to adding in an extra set or two in the final weeks of their mesocycle for, say, their side delts or their biceps. Would I, add in a couple of sets for their squats and deadlifts? Probably not, unless I was absolutely certain that I had to.
Right.
But for an exercise like a leg extension, a bicep curl, tricep push down, why not? You're going to deload. It makes them feel like they're training a little bit harder, doing a little bit more. And again, if they're objectively and subjectively recovered, I can see, a good case for that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that, man. Hope I answered that.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I definitely have more I could follow up with, but I know you got to go pretty soon here. So I'm sure we'll do another one of these. You want to tell people where they can find more of your stuff?
They can just find me on Instagram, JPS Health _Fitness, JPS _Education. And then my own account is Schepis _JPS. We're on YouTube. We've got a website. Just search JPS and you'll probably find us somewhere.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me, brother.